The economic community of West African states has suspended Mali from all its institutions, while the African Union is demanding an immediate return to civilian government. These are part of international reactions to the breach of democratic processes in the West African state. In the meantime, Army officer Colonel Assimi Goita has announced himself as the chairman of the National Committee for the Salvation of the People. In New York, the UN Security Council has asked soldiers to return to the barracks. We started talking about Mali yesterday. We're talking about Mali today. I'm sure we'll talk about Mali too tomorrow.
Indeed, it's a developing situation, and things have happened in quick succession as we've seen them. Yes, those sanctions have been slapped on the country. The borders have been closed. This is trying to put pressure on the military junta there. But will this be successful? Considering that, ECOWAS and regional bodies have also tried to intervene before it got to this point where we saw that coup d'etat yesterday. But there are certain questions to ask, really, because we also heard that the military junta in power has now had a meeting with the opposition movement, and they welcome the ousting of the president. While this has been widely condemned outside of the country, we continue to see that jubilation within the country. So a lot of things are hinged on how the country will move forward from here. But for me, I think that the biggest winners in all of this are the jihadists, who will take advantage of this fluid situation, this political instability in Mali.
Dr. Abati?
Well, in a sense, this is history repeating itself again in Mali. We had hoped that after the crisis in 2012 and the restoration of democratic rule in 2013 and President Keita spending 2 terms in office, that Mali will have been able to move forward. But now, as at this moment, Mali is back to where it was in 2012 and indeed in a worse situation. Now we can put a face to the leaders of the junta. In 2012, the junta that took over, that removed Amadou Toumani Touré, they said there were a national committee for the restoration of democracy and the state. Unfortunately, we have not seen a true restoration of the state defending the interest of the people of Mali. Now we have in place another junta that calls itself a National Committee for the Salvation of the People. Now, yesterday when the leaders of that junta addressed the public, the country, they said they are not interested in power, that they're just interested in stabilizing Mali within a reasonable time. What constitutes a reasonable time? So, and that's where I think that the international community should put pressure. ECOWAS has already taken the lead by announcing blockade against Mali, by suspending Mali from all activities of ECOWAS. Now, leaders of ECOWAS are meeting today. They are holding a virtual meeting at which we think that we hope that they will take more concrete decisions. What is likely to happen, in my view, is that ECOWAS will probably put together a team of negotiators, as they did in 2012, to read the riot act to the soldiers that have taken over. And then again, there has been talk about the activation of the ECOWAS standby force, or ECOMOG, if you like, which is the popular phrase we use in Nigeria. And Nigeria, in fact, speaking through Geoffrey Onyema, our Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday, called for the ECOWAS standby force, which could be deployed if the leaders of the West African countries today are able to reach a consensus on that, to flush out the coupists in Mali, or to give them strict conditions. When it occurred in 2012, within a matter of weeks, in fact, less than 10 days, the junta was asked to step aside and allow Sanogo, who was then the head of parliament, to act, to take over the presidency in an acting capacity. But on the long run, the Adesua referred to advantage being given to the Tuareg rebels in the northern part of the country. Now, Goita yesterday, that's Colonel Goita, he made a point that they're going to respect the Algiers Agreement, which is the 2015 agreement with the Tuaregs. Well, how they intend to go about that, I do not understand, when these coupists themselves have imposed a regime of chaos on Bamako and other parts of the country. But ECOWAS will need to provide the necessary leadership, and we call on the international community to continue to put pressure on the soldiers that have taken over in Mali, to make it clear to them that they lack legitimacy. It doesn't matter the number of people on the streets of Bamako who are jubilating. The big question is about legitimacy.
Yes.
Because the ECOWAS protocol, the AU protocol, insist on the takeover of power only through democratic means. Yeah. What has happened in Mali is extra-constitutional, is an act of impunity and brigandage, which amounts to a violation of the rights of the people of Mali to choose their own leaders through the ballot box.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Abati. The Arewa Consultative Forum has asked northern religious, traditional, political leaders to refrain from inflammatory statements in order not to worsen tension and insecurity in the region. In a communique issued after the first meeting of the newly elected National Working Committee, headed by former Minister of Agriculture Al Duogbe, the forum asked the federal and state government to take urgent steps to arrest the deteriorating security situation in the north. The statement also called on governors of northern states to pay adequate attention to agriculture. The forum observed that school enrollment in the region has remained low, appealing to governors in the 19 states of the region to take urgent steps to enhance school enrollment and eradicate the rampant incident of street begging, which it says it has been very unhealthy for the overall development of the north. Quick take on this, Arewa Consultative Forum, saying no more inflammatory statements.
But it's also good to note that the head of the National Working Committee of the group is a former member of cabinet of the Muhammadu Buhari administration, former agriculture minister, Al Duogbe. And there was something instructive he said. He said, life is now as tough as the Civil War. I don't know if there's any indictment that is as grave as that. And it also points to the failure of leadership in the northern region. It is no news. It is common knowledge that the capital of poverty in Nigeria is domiciled in the north. So leadership and, of course, leadership. That's it.
It's like a regular refrain, Dr. Abati. That's what we've been calling for?
Well, I mean, it's welcome when groups like ACF, Afenifere, or Aneze Ndigbo, when they focus on the interests of their people, it's perfectly within their legitimate rights to do so. And the Arewa Consultative Forum are now saying that leaders should desist from inflammatory remarks that could heat up the polity. I think that's something that nobody can quarrel with. But the more fundamental issues that they also raise is about cooperation between the state governments and the federal government in addressing the security challenge in the north. Because, funnily enough, just as they were issuing that statement, 100 persons were taken hostage, kidnapped in Kunuka in Borno State, which is an indication that the threat of insecurity is real. Education, also important. They want the northern governors to get children off the streets. Now, the north, leaders of the north have been holding meetings on education since they had the first one in 1959. And no progress, no concrete progress, I mean, given the level of the importance of that particular challenge has been made. So it's not enough to hold talks, it's to walk the talk, particularly with regard to education in the north. Agriculture, alleviating poverty, those are the usual noises.
All right, walk the talk. Pretty much a way of saying action. That's all on news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have the trio of Rotus, Michael, and Aaron to give us updates on Africa and global business and COVID-19. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show right here on the Rise News channel. Our dependable Rotus Odiri is here to give us Africa business update. Over to you, Rotus.
Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor, and good morning, Adesua. Got to be quick because there's so much to discuss. First things first, my continuous lamenting about inflation and the effect on the yield on investment returns. We yesterday had a bond auction, federal government bond auction. There's a lot of information here, but this just shows that the bonds were oversubscribed for the 10-year bond. 15, 25, and 30-year bond. The stop rates, the third highlight at the bottom, before the blurb at the bottom, 6.7% for the 10-year, 9.35% for the 15-year, 9.75 for the 25, and 9.9 for the 30-year. Let's quickly move to the bond chart. If you now plot this against inflation, those bonds that I just talked about, so 6.7, 9.3, 9.75, 9.9, inflation at 12.82%. The yield on the bond for investors who are jumping in here is negative. Now, the thing is, I keep lamenting about this, but I must come to the defense of the government very quickly. The government is refinancing its debt at a cheaper rate. Every time we come and talk about Nigeria's debt service to revenue ratio, how in Q1 2020 they paid 99% of their revenues servicing debt. This is the debt. The government is, if you are investing in a bond or a treasury bill, the interest you are being paid is an expense to the government. So they have to do something about lowering rates. But then why should we have to suffer for that when we are investors? We've got personal finance, we've got bills, we want our investments to yield a better return. So essentially, if you look at the inflation chart, let's pull up the inflation chart very quickly. You've seen the trend as inflation continues to rise. Now, July, year-on-year July, 12.82. As inflation continues to increase, it eats into the real rates of return for our investments. Let's quickly move on to Citigroup. They've announced their first female country head in Nigeria, Mrs. Ireti Samuel Ogbo. She takes over on September the 1st. She spent the last 5 years as the managing director. EMEA is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Managing director of the EMEA Payments, Receivables, Treasury, and Trade Solutions at Citibank in their London office. She takes over from Akin Dawodu, who steps down on September the 1st. Citigroup, of course, has operated in Nigeria for 36 years, and this is the first time they are appointing a female country head for the company. They've got 11 offices across Africa. Quickly moving on to IBAN, the Independent Broadcasters Association of Nigeria. They've now weighed in on the business of broadcasting and whether or not the NBC should be leveling a 5 million naira fine on a radio station for what occurred last week. They've stated that the fee is excessive. Secondly, they stated that IBAN is the Independent Broadcasting Association of Nigeria, right? So this is their press release on hate speech. So again, the fee, 5 million fee is excessive. The amendments to the 6th Broadcasting Code are in dispute. So as a result of it being in dispute, you can't now level a fine from what has been disputed. Remember, the fine went from 500,000 to 5 million. Radio stations are struggling in Nigeria right now, and they have revenues has been reduced. They've cut salaries. They've laid off staff. You can't be putting a 5 million naira fine on a radio station at this point in time. It is very, 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 it's a big hit on them. Also, they said the NBC can't be accuser, judge, and executioner. An independent body should be allowed to review the ethical and professional media standards. And they're putting forward the Nigerian Press Council, which is made up of the Nigerian Union of Journalists. I mean, Doctor will definitely know a lot about this. And so that's the body that should be reviewing these things before the NBC is to want to level a fine on anyone. And then moving on to this great report from Budget, which is a financial responsibility civil advocacy group. Budget has put out this report. It's 84 pages long. I hope to get into it during the Global Business Report. But very quickly, they said that there are a number of things that government should focus on. One is population. If you look at the population trend as it's growing, the darker green line, where we are now, well, you can argue 190, 200 million. If you look at the arrow as it goes up to 2100, we could hit 800 million people. Does government have the finances to cover this? Population is an issue. Let's move on to the next slide. Fertility rates. Average is 5.8 for the nation. Now, this is a review that was done by the Bureau of Statistics for 2017 with the help of UNICEF. 11 northern states, Adesua and I believe Doctor was just talking about leadership in the north and how it's a poverty central. 11 states are ahead of Nigeria's average birth rate. Let's take a look at those 11 states right now. They are, is Jigawa 8.5, Kano, Kebbi at 7.7, Katsina 7.5, Gombe, Sokoto, and Zamfara 7.3, Bauchi, Yobe 6.8, Niger 6.4, and Borno 6.1. As your population continues to grow, you're putting more pressure on your welfare services. The report goes more in depth. I mean, they talked about priority 1 being female education, priority 2 being a jobs agenda for Nigeria, priority 3 being spending on healthcare. Again, it's very, very comprehensive, but a lot has to be be said about what's going on in the northern part of the region, because there was also somewhere where they talked about health and the amount of stunting in children, malnutrition. A majority of those children are also up north. So when you think about the higher birth rates in the north, higher poverty, higher unemployment, there's a lot of, I think a state of emergency has to be called for that region with regards to moving forward. And that's, I know it's a lot very Nigeria-centric, today's Africa Business Update, but that's what we have today.
No, but you've raised very important issues, particularly with regard to population. I mean, if our population is growing at a higher rate than GDP, and birth rate is very high in parts of the country, then we need to go back to population policy, which was a major issue of discussion in this country at a time. Now, that national population policy, which nobody pays attention to, recommends 4 children per family. Right. But the reality of it, of course, is that as a result of cultural reasons, religious reasons, people thinking that, look, they have the privilege of having multiple partners, they can have as many children as they want. But that creates a problem for Nigeria, because if it's projected that by 2050, Nigeria's population will probably have doubled, then we don't have infrastructure, we don't have the resources, the economy perhaps is not diversified enough, and we may not have been able to achieve that even in 30 years' time. So it puts more pressure on resources with very serious implications for stability. So that's why in discussions of how to move Nigeria forward, there are some persons who keep insisting that we have to take a look at our population, because those figures, those birth rates that you put up, they could be frightening. However, to get a realistic picture, you also need to know what the death rate in Nigeria is. But, you know, we don't have exact statistics either on death rate or, and I'm even sure that birth rate figures, some people may even, challenge them. That's that about that. The Independent Broadcasting Association of Nigeria, is good to see that they are speaking up against what appears to be the violation of the interest of stakeholders in terms of how the National Broadcasting Code has been reviewed. And I hope, I think that's the important point, that the Ministry of Information and the National Broadcasting Commission will pay attention to all of this and respond, and not just say, oh, these people are complaining. Because these are the stakeholders who insist that they were not consulted in the first place.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. I just really want to chip in this before we leave. I also like the submission they made that there should be an independent body. The NBC cannot fine and at the same time seal your fate, because what is done before is the NBC fines. What they do is they fine, they collect the fine. The best the NBC will give you is warning once or twice, and they'll fine. I've been fined many times by the NBC. I'm talking from experience. Right. So that independent body is needed in all of this.
I just want to say we are overly due for a census.
Yes.
We need one.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
I hope you have the resources to conduct that census.
We should find the resources. We need to know how many we are.
America is currently doing one anyway. Moving on to more business update. Michael also joins us now from London. Michael, great to have you. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Good morning, Michael Wilson.
I mean, just before we go back to Michael, just like what you said, very germane. We had one last in 2006. It's supposed to be a 10-year cycle. We're long overdue in 2016. And it's really very important, because why do we have it? For planning. It's really essential in this country. And we need to do something really about our population. Because when you look at it, it's snowballing out of control. Population growth rate is about 3%. GDP is growing less than 3%. It can't work.
I can't recollect if Rotus did mention the year this statistics was based on, because we also need to look at our current realities of...
Yeah.
All right, well, let's do it then. So Japanese shares fell on the US Federal Reserve, showing that policymakers were very concerned about the strength of the economic recovery as far as the pandemic's concerned. China, now here's a good one. China actually reported the largest number of stock investors in 5 years in July, as investors rushed to get hold of the share market. The amount of people actually in the stock market rose to 2.4 million in July. And that's a worrying thing, because that's where the massive stock bubble actually was. And you know what happened then a few years ago. Australian shares fell as well. So overall then, Asian equities and US futures fell, hurt by the US Federal Reserve's caution about the economy, tensions with China and new clusters of coronavirus infections. MSI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan fell almost 2%. So record highs on Wall Street yet again, and we've done that disconnect argument many times on the programme. Maybe the markets know something that worried consumers and governments don't know. I don't know, but there's still that disconnect. Those minutes then released from yesterday from the FOMC's last policy meeting showed that they reckoned that a recovery was highly uncertain. So Dow futures down about 200 points. European stocks will have a pessimistic day, I guess, on the results of on to do with that. And some interesting wrinkles have actually come out overnight. Number one, we talked on Monday, didn't we, about the additional curbs being put on Huawei and the US moving to cut off its access to global suppliers. There's a feeling now that Beijing won't retaliate because actually what the US does, it takes companies bring a lot of innovation into China. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned Russia and China not to disregard the reimposition of all United Nations sanctions on Iran, and President Trump has directed him to trigger that today at the UN Security Council. Apple became a $2 trillion company yesterday, but it's still obviously mired in all that business about anti-competitive practices, and also the fact that it has very close ties in China, which of course doesn't go down well with the present administration. Airbnb has filed to float. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Airbnb floating, because you wouldn't think that people would want to move around in a pandemic, but apparently they do. And finally, commodities, Brent down a bit. That's not to do with the drawdown as far as United States stocks are concerned. It's to do with a feeling that the demand is crimped by all the usual things that we talk about. I hope you could hear that.
I just wanted to comment on Apple becoming a $2 trillion company. It's just amazing the power of innovation and how it can change the world. And that's what we should learn in Africa, how we can kickstart our tech sector, make it viable, because that's the new wave of wealth for the entire continent. I just checked, Africa's GDP is about 2.58 trillion, and Apple is worth $2 trillion US dollars. And that's mammoth. If just one man's idea, one man's innovation, one man's capacity to be able to think about the future and do it over and over again can be worth that in capitalization, I think it's something we should all learn from on the African continent.
Well, Michael, I was going to ask you about...
And I think that's a lesson for the rest of the world as well. Whether it would happen, of course, is different. Have to find another kind of product.
I ask you about the disconnect that you talked about between the economic impact of the pandemic and what is happening in the U.S. Stock market, where we have witnessed a very surprising, remarkable rebound after initially there was a collapse up to about 33%. For the benefit of our viewers, is this something that can be explained, that can be properly contextualized in terms of what is going on?
It's an editorial or an opinion piece I was reading this morning in the Financial Times by a very distinguished economist who was saying, she was actually saying, that everybody's done the story about the disconnect between Main Street and Wall Street, but actually, maybe the markets actually do know something. Maybe they do understand that life is going to be very different and really innovative, after the pandemic. So that was the thought about that. It's worth discussing, isn't it?
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. We'll see you again tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you so much, Michael, once again. For an update on COVID-19 pandemic, Aaron Akerjala here with us. Aaron, how are you doing?
Good morning, Rufai. How are you doing today? And good morning to you, Doctor. Good morning, Adesua.
Good morning, Aaron.
Yes, okay, let's get it all started with Nigeria. COVID-19, we know, has been in Nigeria for some few months right now, and it seems to have actually reached a very grim milestone. 50,000 cases have actually been recorded of COVID-19 in Nigeria, which is not too good, looking at how things have actually played out in the country. You can actually see the 593 new cases were actually recorded in the last 24 hours. So it takes the number to 50,488. And at the moment, what we've still been talking about in terms of COVID-19 and how it has actually played out in Nigeria is in the area of testing. And I must actually say, Dr. Ekwazu was here yesterday on the morning show. He spoke about how things are in Nigeria and the fight against COVID-19. But nevertheless, a lot of people have criticized the government time and time again for their response to COVID-19, understanding that we've seen over the last couple of months, we've seen over the last couple of weeks, that grants have been given to Nigeria, to the Nigerian government, and it has not been commensurate to their action against COVID-19, and they are claiming that the government needs to really do more and actually sit up, because at the moment that we've crossed that 50,000 mark, the only silver lining in this very dark cloud seems to be the fact that when you check out the recovery rate for those who have gone down with COVID-19, it is very high, way more than half. So certainly something is actually going on, something is actually working there. But aside that, maybe that might be due to, we've brought scientific reasons to some of this, to some of the recoveries we've actually seen from COVID-19, maybe due to the fact that the median age in Africa and even in Nigeria is between 22 and 40 thereabouts. So if you don't have serious ailments before now, certainly the tendencies to have an exacerbated COVID-19 symptoms is very, very low. So, but nevertheless, we need to still do more in terms of testing. We need to still do more in terms of tracing, because right now we are at that stage, according to WHO, where communal spreading is very rife, which is very, very scary. Initially, we saw it in big cities, but right now that is being dissipated into communities. We need to really do more in terms of testing. We're hoping that the antibody test will actually also give us an inkling and also give us a direction of how the virus has actually gone around Nigeria, and more importantly, use that data to map out a strategy moving forward. They've accused the Presidential Task Force of acting really blind in terms of COVID-19 actions and restrictions. They need to be more scientific based, and they need to be more data driven. Well, moving away from that, since we're still talking about let's actually get to South Africa, where right now there have been talks about COVID-19 and corruption, and pressure is on the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, right now to be able to put his foot down on the ground, because his party and several big-wig politicians in South Africa have been fingered in massive corruptions to the tune of 5.5 billion rand, which equates to about $290 million, in over 658 cases that involves purchases of PPEs, hospital and quarantine sites, catering services for people during the lockdown, ventilators, disinfecting equipment, motorized wheelchair. 658 cases as the Special Investigative Unit in South Africa opened up, all right, for people who have profited in this very grim time, which is very, very sad, because we've seen this thing prevalent across Africa. Boston yesterday, all right, on Arises was speaking about the fact that there is something they dub in Kenya right now, which is called the COVID-19 billionaires, those who have gone to profit heavily from the predicament of the world, which is rather unfortunate and which is rather distasteful. Let's see what becomes of that. South Africa has been going hard at people who have sought to profit from COVID-19. Instead of helping people, rather they are seeking to fleece people of the little that the government is trying to provide for them. And also cries have been in Nigeria that such kind of investigations be open, because clearly there is a disconnect between the grants we've received, what the government say they are doing, and what is really on ground. So let's see how things actually go. We'll still be monitoring the particular situation. But before we get into this, we were talking about disinformation actually prevalent in COVID-19. And in Bolivia, the Legislative House have gone on to approve chlorine dioxide as a means of treating COVID-19. This is the most preposterous we would ever hear, because chlorine dioxide is a bleach, literally, that is used to whiten paper, used to disinfect surfaces, used to whiten clothes. And for the government, or rather for the legislative arm of the government, to give this a green light for treating COVID-19, and it is very clear that it has adverse side effects when you take it. Everyone knows this. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know the adverse effect of chlorine dioxide in the body system, and it's unfortunate that there have been unconventional talks about it treating COVID-19, and the legislative arm in Bolivia have gone on to approve it. We know over 4,000 people have died from COVID-19 in Bolivia. Over 100,000 cases have been recorded, but this is simply off the chain. We've seen, although at some point President Donald Trump also, he said it might have been a joke, but he also touted the fact that chlorine injections could also be given to people as a means of cure for COVID-19. We have been hearing this time and time again, and we try to speak out against this. At the moment, there are no cure for, or there is no cure for COVID-19. There are no cures for COVID-19 at the moment. That brings us to the talk about the race for a vaccine. I told you guys yesterday that we're going to look at how far we've actually come for the race to get a vaccine. It's still up in the air. Well over 148 entries have been coming in, and more are still being accepted in this particular vaccine race. At the moment, we are in phase 1, we have 20 candidates. In phase 2, we've got 13. In phase 3, we've got 8, and 2 have been approved, but with a big question mark, which includes CanSino Bio, the Chinese firm, and also Gamaleya Institute and their vaccine that they say they've actually brought out, the Sputnik 5. We're still looking at that one. All right. Minor checks are still being done. The WHO has not given the green light for that particular Sputnik 5. So certainly we cannot really say if we do have a vaccine right now or we have a vaccine for emergency services, because we know that when we do get a vaccine, first of all, it will be given for those who need it for emergency services before the world can actually go. Now, moving on to the next one, in a bit to actually break it down quickly, for the genetic vaccines, we know that Moderna have been doing major work, but they might have hit a snag because of patent issues that actually happened in July. We know that the Trump government has put in about $1.5 billion to actually support this with the hope of getting 100 million doses. But that particular patent war they got into sometime in July might have just pushed them back in terms of the patent they wanted to use to get their own vaccine. We'll still talk, maybe if time permits or sometime we'll talk about that. BioNTech also, another company that are pushing hard alongside Pfizer and Fosun Pharma for a vaccine. They are in phase 3 right now, and let's see what happens. They've been testing phase 3 in Argentina, Brazil. Moving on to the next ones for some others that have actually come in. For the viral vector vaccine, we've spoken about CanSino Bio, the Chinese firm, and what they're actually doing. They've been testing already. They already have a vaccine for the military, and they're still in phase 3. The Gamaleya Institute has Sputnik 5, right now not approved by the WHO, but they do say they have a vaccine. Then AstraZeneca also, and what they're doing with the University of Oxford. Moving on to the next one quickly for the brevity of time. And Novavax, we spoke about what they are doing. They've begun phase 2, as a matter of fact, and phase 3 here in Africa. In South Africa, we mentioned that some few days ago with their protein-based vaccine, which is one of the best vaccines. They claim because of transportation that other vaccines need to be in cold spaces, but this doesn't really have to do that. Moving on to the next one quickly now, the whole virus vaccine with Chinese firms, Sinopharm and Sinovac. Both are in phase 3 at the moment, and they are hopeful that they can actually, before the end of the year, bring a vaccine.
Well, thank you for that COVID vaccine tracker that you've presented. But what is happening in Bolivia, as you reported it, is quite curious. I think what we're dealing with is simply a failure of leadership. The Legislative Assembly, its job is to make laws for the good of society, not to legislate over COVID-19 treatment. But of course, in Bolivia, there is this sense that, there could be a miracle cure for COVID-19. And to find that the Legislative Assembly has jumped onto that bandwagon to be recommending a bleach,
yes,
a disinfectant.
Yes.
Despite the fact also that persons who have used this, there have been injuries, there have been cases of hospitalization, and the Ministry of Health has warned repeatedly that, look, nobody should go and use chlorine dioxide. But the people prefer, because there's also a lot of superstition, they prefer to listen to the lawmakers who are not focusing on their primary assignment instead of listening to science as, articulated by the Ministry of Health. Now, as for the South African case, yes, corruption is a big issue with regard to COVID-19 procedures. You'll recall that in Zimbabwe, Obadiah Moyo, the Minister of Health, he was also taken to court for a public procurement scandal. But the challenge is to have good governance around COVID-19 issues, and there are lessons that Nigeria can learn from what we have seen elsewhere.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doctor.